Hey there, everyone. What's up? Today, I'm back, and I'm going to be talking about a game. This one is kind of a long time coming. I mean, I finished it a bunch of times already, and I haven't played it in a couple weeks. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Bloodborne today. I talked about it recently a little bit on the CXG podcast, the latest episode we did. So if you haven't seen it, it's up on the CXG channel. So if you're liking the CXG podcast, you listen to it every once in a while, you should subscribe there because I'm not always going to post that it's happening here. And we did it live last week with Big Mike from Chargeback Forward. It was good. So give that a listen. I'll probably link it below just in case. But if I remember, probably I won't though. So go there yourself. But anyway, Bloodborne. Okay, I've probably shot this video before. I have a feeling that I've shot this video before and I just didn't like how it came out or I was rambling aimlessly. So if I do that this time, sorry, I'm not going to redo it. I'm just going to upload it as it is. That's how it's going to go. But so let's get into Bloodborne. What are my thoughts on Bloodborne? A lot of stuff going on in Bloodborne that I really liked and some stuff that I didn't. Um, First of all, I guess I'll go over the basics of it because I guess probably not everybody's played it, and probably everybody's not paying a lot of attention. Maybe are, I don't know. But the general idea of Bloodborne is a little bit different from the other games in the Soul series in that it's faster paced. It's got a kind of a different idea behind how the weapons work. It's got a it's altogether it's slightly different in a lot of ways, making it pretty different overall. Um, the atmosphere is it's still dark and atmospherically dark, and well, story wise dark also, but we'll get into that later. Um, there are I want to say not as many enemies as a normal Souls game. It's not as long as a normal Souls game. It's a much smaller area. Um, the kind of way that the game is played is it's different. It's a much more aggressive game. So in previous Souls games, it's much more plotting, action reaction kind of thing where the enemy will act and you react. Uh, Bloodborne is not exactly like that. Bloodborne is more. There is a bit of that action reaction stuff. It's still in there, but there's a lot more preemptive acting is necessary in a lot of cases, where some enemies don't give a tell for their attacks. It'll just be a quick attack. It just comes out of nowhere. It happens. I think that might put off people who are used to Souls being very, you can there's a tell for everything. But I think this game isn't exactly like that. I want to say that those moves usually have like a kind of tell that's um, different than the normal like kind of wind up to an attack. It's much different than that. It's much more like if you're at a certain range and you're doing a certain thing, that attack will come. Or the enemy is doing a certain thing, it does a certain attack, and then afterwards it'll do this other fast attack that you doesn't have a tell. Those kind of things are good. So lots of times you're just kind of predicting what's going to happen. It's not really predictive, but it's similar to that in the sense that there's not a tell, an obvious tell anyway. But I think a lot of the game itself brings it to a different level for the kind of fast-paced, actiony kind of battles that you didn't usually have in a Souls game because it's a much slower kind of combat system. And I don't know, I think a lot of people might be put off by it if you're really into, like, you play a really defensive game in Souls. Like, it might be really hard, I think, in the beginning. And for me, I generally don't play a really defensive game in Souls. Not that I generally play like when I've explained this a million times, but I always play as a magic user in the in my first playthrough in every Souls game I've played because I prefer magic users. I like using mages in all of the RPGs. If I can make a character and I have a choice, it's going to be a magic user of some kind because In real life, I can hit somebody with a sword. In real life, I can't throw a fireball at them. And I think that's the kind of thing I like to do in a game. So when I first played Bloodborne, I started as an arcane focused character, and I had no. I mean, I played Bloodborne. I've played through Bloodborne about 7 times already, and I do have the platinum trophy. I've been through everything in the game, and I it took me. I didn't go. I went through the game twice without a guide, and then I started using a guide afterwards to clean up trophies and find stuff I didn't find before. But it was actually pretty interesting because on my first playthrough, I got most of the bosses. I found almost everybody in the game, and on my second playthrough, I found way less. I actually couldn't remember how to get back to Canehurst Castle in my second playthrough. I just had no idea. I totally forgot, and I wasn't gonna look it up, so it it was a much shorter playthrough on my second time through. But on the first time, I was playing as an arcane playthrough, and it actually worked out really well because even though there's not uh, magic like there is in the Souls games, there is some type of magic, and it was like almost game breaking towards the end of the game. Like once you got some certain magic items, there's like a homing shot kind of one. That one kind of broke a lot of bosses. um, I think they might have fixed it now. They might have patched the kind of reactions out that the enemies would have to that, but it would just break them sometimes. They would you could shoot something from far away and run away, and the homing shots would go after the enemy, and the enemy would just kind of try and chase you, and you could beat, like I beat there was like a bunch of bosses I beat without being hit that way. It was kind of, I mean, it felt cheesy after a while because like the end boss of the game never did any damage to me, and that was because I was using magic as a magic user. So I had like arcane was my highest stat in my first playthrough, and I was using a. I'm trying to remember what weapon I used first. Um, I want to say it was um, the greatsword one. I forget the name. Whatever. Because I also I played it entirely in Japanese, so I don't know a lot of the English names. Um, but yeah, there are a lot of the of different kind of things going on, and the arcane build was really great, I thought, and I liked playing as the arcane build. It was good. You got certain gems that raised your arcane stats. It was all good. And then my second playthrough, I played as a blood tinge build, and that was fun too, which made me think like no matter what stat you focused on, you could probably have a viable build depending on what weapons you chose and how you played the game. And it was like that because I went through and I played like like a gun focused character, and then I went through as like a strength build and then as a dex build, and I started doing uh, kinds of challengey type runs towards the end. It's a good game overall. I think it lends itself to that. Not, I want to say, not as much as previous Souls games. There isn't as much variety in your weapons, and let me preface that by saying that the weapons themselves are varied, and within themselves they're varied. So each weapon has a different form, and you can switch between those forms. So it feels like, well, two different weapons per weapon. I mean, in many cases, it's actually two different weapons per weapon. Not all the time, but for the most part. And you go through the game and you have those weapons as options, but like in previous games you would have had to carry two weapons to get the same. For example, there's the Kirk hammer, which is like a giant sledgehammer type of weapon that can also transform in just to a longsword. In previous games you would have to have two weapons there, but in this case you have just that one that can transform, and that's the same for a lot of weapons. You have kind of like short range, long range, or heavy, light. It's kind of crossover with the weapons, and it's a really cool system, but it doesn't lend itself to kind of focusing on a variety of weird weapons and going through like on a challenge run with just fist weapons or something. Um, Going through with like, this type of weapon. It doesn't kind of lend itself to that kind of challenge run, which were, it's not horrible. I just think like the previous games led more to that because there were such a large amount of weapons. In Dark Souls 2, for example, had way more weapons, but I think a lot of people just didn't use a lot of them. They were just weren't viable. So what Bloodborne did was cut out all that kind of extra stuff that people weren't really using and just kind of boiled it down to these base small amount of weapons that are all really viable. And that's good. I mean, it's not a bad choice. It's just a different choice. And it's one that I like either way. I mean, I would like there to be a ton of weapons, or I'd like there to be this kind of like weapons within, dual weapons within one thing. It's a pretty cool system altogether, and I enjoy it. So, what about Bloodborne with that I didn't like? I did mention that there were things about the game that I didn't like. Overall, the I want to say the level design is spectacular. This is not something I don't like. This is actually out of all the Souls games, this game has the best level design out of any of the games. It's masterwork level good. It's every stage has a number of shortcuts and elevators and things that bring you all over the world, and it's all interconnected in this like really great way. I think the game itself is so well put together that I honestly can't think of a game that has better level design than Bloodborne. Um, I I have a real hard time thinking of a game that even comes close, and even if I do, it'd probably be Dark Souls. So it's hard to find find a game that has a better level design. But for the things I didn't like was the Chalice dungeons, which brings me back to the thing of level design. Because the main game is this. See, you thought I was going off on a tangent there, but I was looping it back. The thing with the main game is that the level design is so great, and then you go into the Chalice dungeons, and it's kind of like cobbled together from other parts, and like parts repeat in other dungeons, and it's just like template rooms stuck together, and you do it a million times in different ways, the same types of rooms with the same types of stuff in them in a dungeon over and over, and it it's not really good. It's not to say that the Chalice dungeons are bad; they're just boring, and um, they shouldn't be boring. It's just you have to do them so many times that they become boring, and the Chalice dungeons are like will like double the amount of time you're playing the game if you're doing them all, and they don't even start to be fun until towards the end of them. So like you have to go through, you know, 10 dungeons. Not even like in a lot of cases I had to go through more than 10 because I just didn't have enough materials to form the next dungeon. So I would have to repeat dungeons or create the same dungeon again, and just to kind of hopefully get materials. And you know, when you reform the dungeon, it's not like you're getting a new dungeon, a new randomly generated dungeon. You're getting the same dungeon, and it's the same not fun kind of rooms over and over again, and the same kinds of. Well, I'll give the Chalice dungeons this: the enemies are different from the main game for the most part, and there's a lot of interesting bosses in there that are new, not in the main game, and are in many cases more challenging than the main game bosses. So I'll give it that. It's pretty good for that kind of element of it, but the main part of it, which is like the dungeon crawling part, is just gets boring really quickly. So going through the Chalice dungeons, I went through them all just for completion's sake, but I probably will never do it again. I honestly don't see myself going back to the Chalice dungeons and be like, yeah, I could probably go through all these dungeons again because they were that fun. Not going to happen. But the main game itself is fun enough to play multiple times. Like I said, I played through it about 7 times. And Bloodborne does a lot of good things to keep it interesting that way. There's a lot of, like a normal Souls game, there's lots of stuff to find. There's secrets, there's kind of um, complicated ways to unlock things and find things. There was things like, I played the game, after I played the game twice without the guide, when I started looking in the guide, there was, I never found like Ebrietas. Um, I never found that in my normal playthrough without a guide. I just didn't know it was there, and so I didn't even fight Ebrietas until the end of my, until my third playthrough. Maybe, maybe I didn't even then, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there were stuff like story elements that I didn't find in my original playthrough, like stuff that's like you find in Canehurst Castle. There's the queen that you can find, and I don't know how I didn't find it. It's because when I killed the king there, I put on his crown immediately, but I didn't walk. There's like a way to unlock a secret door in there, and I didn't. I just like didn't walk far enough. I didn't know it was going to happen anyway, but I just didn't go that way, and even though I had the crown on, I didn't unlock it without the guide. I would have been like super shocked had I done that, but I assumed that something would happen when I put the crown on, but nothing did, and it meant the position was important, and I didn't know that. But so those are things I found in the guide, in a guide later, and it was I didn't like read a guide. I like watched like Epic Name Bros playthrough of Bloodborne, and I was like, oh, okay, that stuff I missed. But the actually like in my with even without the guide, the only boss I missed was Ebrietos in my first playthrough anyway. In the second playthrough, I missed all of Canehurst Castle. But yeah, what I want to talk about a little bit now is Bloodborne's story, because this is a story that is really good for me. Um, it starts out as this kind of um, monster story, like a werewolf story almost. Like there's this kind of blood curse, and that's very much like lycanthropy. A werewolf bites you and you become a werewolf, and like you can imagine that something along the lines of lycanthropy has happened to this town where people have been attacked by beasts and they're becoming beasts. And that's like not exactly the story, but you don't really know that because you don't have the kind of basis for what all the terms mean in the beginning. So when you start off that way, you're kind of in this like Van Helsing kind of werewolf town or whatever is like how you'd imagine it. But as the story progresses, it swerves you. It takes you into like a totally different route. One that I really enjoyed, in that it became like a cosmic horror. It went from kind of gothic horror to cosmic horror in a really great way, and I liked that. I love the kind of H.P. Lovecraft cosmic horror thing, and there's a ton of kind of callbacks to H.P. Lovecraft in the story, in the creatures themselves, but in the kind of lore of the story. There's all types of stuff that brings you right back to stuff. If you've ever read like the Dunwich Horror, even watch the movie, you could get the gist. But Dunwich Horror is like uh, prototype Bloodborne in a lot of cases for the main kind of idea of the story. And I think if the whoever wrote the story hadn't read the Dunwich Horror, I'd be really shocked, because there's a lot of elements that are almost exactly the same. Um, but yeah, it was really good for me because like I've mentioned this before, but I'm like a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. I'm flying like 8,000 miles or something to go to the H.P. Lovecraft convention this year. So if anyone's going to be at the Necronomicon in Providence in August, I'm totally going to be there in the U.S. First time in 10 years, actually. Um, but H.P. Lovecraft, yeah, totally like it. H.P. Lovecraft a lot. And when they kind of switched the story to that way halfway through, I was like, I mean, I'm already hooked in the story, but when it became like a Lovecraft story, I was like, um, going crazy about it. I was loving it. So I want to say like Bloodborne overall probably has my favorite story out of the Souls series. It also has my favorite level design. So, in terms of like overall the Souls kind of series, Bloodborne is like right near the top, probably number two. If only because that story is so great and really had me hooked. Um, but yeah, Bloodborne. This is a game worth having a PS4 for. Um, I know there's a lot of games out for the PS4 right now, but not a lot for everybody, and there's not a lot of exclusives that are really gonna draw people in. Like I have Knack, woo, but uh, beyond that, this is the one. This is the game that if you're like even on the fence, thinking like I liked Bloodborne, I liked Dark Souls, or I like Demon Souls, but I don't have a PS4, you should get one and play this because it's really good. So yeah, that's my general thoughts on Bloodborne. I'm sure there's stuff I'm forgetting that I wanted to talk about. Um, I'm just totally forgetting. I feel like I'm missing something, but if I am, just ask below and I'll comment on the questions. But yeah, overall, that's about it. That's my thoughts on Bloodborne. So next, I'll do another video talking about another game with a Lovecraft twist. So it's gonna be good stuff. So I will see you guys next time.